Hey, what's going on everybody? It's ETAPRIME back here again. Today we're going to be taking a look at the all-new ANBERNIC RG353P. So we've known about this for a couple months now, and a lot of people are really torn on the design. Personally, I do like the way this looks. It's definitely very reminiscent of an SNES controller, and these come in two different colors. So the first one we're going to take a look at here is the transparent black. And ANBERNIC has done this a lot with multicolored devices. As you can see, we've got a transparent smoke color here. I personally think it looks really good, but if I was to choose between the two colors that they have right now as making this video, I would probably go with the gray version because it's definitely more on par with a real Super Nintendo controller. And this is the one that I've been using for the past couple days for testing. Overall, the build quality on it does feel great. It's got those Switch style analog sticks, and we've got two of them, as you can see. And inside of the box, you're going to receive your user manual. We'll also get a USB Type-C charging cable. And the base model does come with a 16GB micro SD card, but you can opt to also get a 64GB. But one cool thing about this device is it actually has internal storage. We've got 32GB of eMMC 5.1, and they've set this up as a dual boot system. We can run Linux from a micro SD card, and we've got two slots on the bottom. We'll take a look at all of the I/O. But the internal storage does come preloaded with Android 11. So this is an Android and Linux dual boot system right out of the box. And with the chipset they're using here, it does perform better with Android. Because when it comes down to it, the manufacturers of the CPU, which in this case happen to be Rockchip, put these out of the door with great Android support. That's really all they're worried about. Then it's kind of left up to either the community or a third-party company to get Linux really working well on these units. So it's great to see Android running on a handheld like this, but it's kind of a plain Jane Android 11 version. So we're not going to get Google Play, but there are some pre-installed third-party applications, and it would have been really nice to see just a little more tweaking with the operating system itself out of the box. There's a couple little things that have been added, we'll take a look at those, but it would have been really nice to just have this kind of set up right out of the box with a nice front end and everything like that. When it comes to the built-in controls, if you're not into the Switch-style analog sticks, then you'll probably not like this. Now, they don't really bother me at all. I play my Nintendo Switch all the time, plus PS5 and the Xbox, so I'm kind of used to all of the sizes of the analog sticks. And this is something that really doesn't bother me at all. I've seen a lot of people complaining about these handhelds coming out with these Switch-style analog sticks, and for me, as long as they work, I can definitely get used to them really fast. ANBERNIC has always done a really good job with their D-pads, at least on most of their devices, and this really isn't any different. We've got an outstanding D-pad here, but when it comes to button placement for the action buttons, A, B, X, Y, in my opinion, I think they're a little too crowded over here. And just taking a look at the whole handheld itself, it seems that they could have spaced these out. It looks like we do have plenty of room. Taking a look at the rest of the unit, on the bottom here, we do have dual stereo speakers, and these can get quite loud. I was impressed by the sound coming out of this thing. Dual micro SD card slots down here, and right in the middle, we've got a 3.5mm headphone jack. We've got their signature dual USB Type-C. We can plug in controllers here or charge and play with the controller at the same time. We've got our volume rocker, a reset button, and this device does support HDMI out right out of the box using a mini HDMI port up top here. And taking a look at the rear of the unit, we've got these anti-slip pads. These are made of rubber, and it really doesn't help out with holding the device when you're playing it, in handheld mode. But I could definitely see these come in handy while this is set down on the desk plugged into HDMI so it doesn't slide all over the place. Checking out the specs, for the CPU, we've got the RK3566 up to 1.8 GHz. This is a quad-core Cortex A55 CPU with a built-in Mali G52 MP2 GPU. So we've actually seen this chip in a couple different handhelds and a bunch of different Android TV boxes this year. I've done a bunch of testing with it, and in my experience, it's kind of on par with the Amlogic S905X3 performance. And if you've dealt with that CPU, you know what kind of performance this thing's going to be putting out. It's not going to run GameCube natively, PS2, 3DS, and it will struggle with some harder to emulate Dreamcast and PSP games. With this unit here, we get 2GB of LPDDR4, and this definitely helps out with running Android. It's not a ton of RAM, but this is really all we need for a little system like this for retro gaming. For the display, we've got a 3.5-inch 640 by 480 OCS fully laminated display with an aspect ratio of 4:3. Viewing angles, brightness look really good on this. It's not a super top-of-the-line screen, but for a handheld like this, I think they did a really good job choosing this display. We've got a 3500 milliamp hour battery and they're claiming up to 6 hours of battery life. I could definitely see that with the screen brightness set to around 50%, because at 100% I've been getting around 4 to 4.5 hours out of it. When it comes to storage, we've got 32 gigabytes of eMMC 5.1 storage built in, and this is where we have Android 11 installed. We've also got those dual micro SD card slots that we saw on the bottom. So we can set this up in a dual boot configuration with Linux on a micro SD card and Android on the internal storage. It does have AC Wi-Fi, so we do get that 5 GHz connection along with Bluetooth 4.2. And like I mentioned, in my opinion, Android is performing much better here. Now when it comes to the Linux distro, if you want to do NES, SNES, Game Boy Advance, you're going to be good to go. But N64 did struggle in a few games, whereas when I was running it in Android, we got really great N64 performance out of this handheld. And that's what we're going to be taking a look at in this video. I'm just going to be doing strictly Android here because this is really going to net you the best performance. You can install a third-party launcher if you want to, or a third-party front end. It's really up to you, but it would have been nice to see something, right out of the box. From the settings menu up here, we do have a CPU performance governor. I'm just going to set it to high performance. And basically, this is just going to allow that CPU to stay at that 1.8 GHz maximum clock while we're gaming on it. This version of Android did come pre-installed with RetroArch and a bunch of different standalone emulators. And when it comes to performance, I'm going to show you exactly what you can emulate up to on this device. And first on the list, we've got SNES using RetroArch with the SNES 9X core. You can basically use any one of these. Some games do work better with, different versions of it. But this does have more than enough power to play all of these games at full speed, even some of the more problematic games like Yoshi's Island. Moving over to Game Boy Advance, still using RetroArch here, and I've had a really great time with GBA and even DS. When it comes to the Drastic emulator, and it is preloaded on this device, it does work well on lower end chips, and this can run those games at full speed. PS1 is another system that this thing can handle very well. I mean, any game I've thrown at it, I've been able to run at 60 FPS. I'm using RetroArch with the PC SX Rearm core, but you could also go with DuckStation if you want to. And yeah, I mean, it doesn't take much to do PS1. We've been able to do PS1 on cheaper handhelds, on lower end handhelds, so I suspected that these games were going to run really well. But what I wasn't expecting from this device was really good N64 emulation. So with this, I did opt to use the standalone version of Mupen 64 Plus FZ. We're basically at the native resolution, but even the harder to emulate games run really well, like Conker's Bad Fur Day or 007. I also tested out the Mupen core in RetroArch, and it can get really close, but on lower end chips, I've always had much better luck with this standalone emulator in Android. Moving over to some Dreamcast, and you might notice we're not getting great performance, but as soon as I turn maximum frame skip on with the Flycast core in RetroArch, these do clean up. But keep in mind, we're still skipping a bunch of frames here. It does make the game a lot more playable, and I actually wasn't expecting to get this kind of performance out of it with frame skip on. It's not horribly bad, but I wouldn't pick this up specifically for Dreamcast emulation. I also tested the standalone version of Redream, and believe it or not, Flycast with this maximum frame skip on did perform much better. I got one more Dreamcast game here, and this is Crazy Taxi 2. So it's looking pretty decent here, but as soon as we get a lot of stuff on screen, some particles and audio going, we still get some dips even with that frame skip set to maximum. And the final thing I wanted to test here was some PSP. I'm using the standalone version of PPSSPP 1X using the Vulkan backend, and the easier to emulate stuff does work very well with this chipset. No frame skip on right now, as you can see with that frame counter up in the top right hand corner. I also tested one of my favorites, Ratchet & Clank Size Matters. Not too bad, but we do get a couple dips here and there, and I consider this kind of a medium grade game to emulate. But moving over to the harder to emulate stuff like Tekken 6, God of War, or Midnight Club, you will have to turn frame skip on to get decent performance out of it. And here's just a quick look. This is Tekken 6, and we're hovering around 57 FPS, but the sound is a little messed up. When this emulator starts dipping down, it really does affect the audio. So going into the settings is pretty easy to turn frame skip on. But again, just like Dreamcast emulation with Flycast, you got a lot of skipping going on. It's not as smooth as it really should be. But yeah, this is something you'll have to do with the harder to emulate stuff on the RK3566. That's just how it is. I mean, it is a lower end chipset. In the end, it's not a bad performer when it comes to lower generation emulators. I wouldn't go out and pick this up specifically for Dreamcast, PSP, and Sega Saturn. I did test some Sega Saturn on this, and performance was not great at all, but they do advertise that it'll do Sega Saturn emulation. And there might be a few easier to emulate Sega Saturn games like Gex that would run at full speed or run pretty decently on this device. But we've seen a lot of devices that do this exact same thing. We can run the older stuff, PS1 works great, but then when you start moving up to PSP and Dreamcast, everything just kind of falls on its face without frame skip on. This device does support PC streaming. You could use Steam Link, it does have Moonlight pre-installed, and you can always stream from your PC, but remember, we've got a 4:3 aspect ratio screen here. A lot of these newer PC games are not 4:3, they're going to look really small on this screen. Now there are a few exceptions. If you wanted to stream GameCube from your PC, you could always do that. Those games were meant to be played on a 4:3 aspect ratio screen, but when it comes to streaming 16:9 content like newer PC games, it's just not going to look great on this smaller screen. Some people don't like these Super Nintendo controller-inspired handhelds, but you know, I've always been a big fan of them. I think they look pretty cool. We've got that 3.5-inch display that looks really good on this. The D-pad is great, just like most of the other ANBERNIC devices. Up top here, we do have those shoulder buttons and triggers. They're not analog, but for the stuff that this thing can play or emulate properly, you're not going to need any kind of analog shoulders at all. This is just basically on or off. But I do wish the action buttons, A, B, X, and Y, were a little further apart from each other. So this does have a really nice screen going for it. It's got great battery life, up to 6 hours, depending on the brightness and what you're doing. I've been averaging around 4.5 hours with it, with the brightness turned to 100% using Android. And mostly, I've been doing N64 and PS1 on this, so if you're doing lighter end emulators with the brightness a little bit lower, you could definitely hit that 6-hour mark that they advertise. But in the end, it's always up to you. There might be some people that love the design of this, there might be some people that hate the design. Some people are definitely going to be wishing for a little more power out of a handheld like this, but the price right now is set at $130 as of making this video, and if you're interested in learning more, I will leave a few links in the description. And if there's anything else you want to see running on this device, just let me know in the comments below. But that's going to wrap it up for this one, and like always, thanks for watching.